Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the New South Wales probate packets in the State Archives collection and how to find them. My name is Emily, and firstly I acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar on the lands of the Darug Nation, and I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all are today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the land and waters of New South Wales. So, what is probate? It's probably a good place to start. So probate is the legal document that authorises an executor to manage the estate of a deceased person according to the deceased's will. The probate authorises an executor to administer the estate as that legal personal representative of the deceased. So, excuse me, anyone who leaves property in New South Wales, whether that's real estate or personal property in New South Wales, even if they don't live in New South Wales, would have a probate packet. The probate process confirms both that the person has actually passed away, so that's very important, and also that the will is valid. And a lot of the documents that you see in the probate packet are people, the executor, attesting that they've actually done all the things that you're expected to do as part of that process. So it's a little bit bureaucratic, but there's some really good stuff in there as well. And all the paperwork for that process is kept in the probate packet by the Supreme Court. So it's all put together in one file, popped into an envelope, and that's called the probate packet. So why are they so special? Well, it's the documents, of course. So the documents are amazing if you're doing family history, possibly local history, if you're tracing through inheritance. Also too, they can still be relevant documents for people today, even if the probates and the decease happened a long time ago. So they are legal documents, but they're also wonderful for other purposes as well. So you usually get the last will and testament and any codicils if there was a will. If there's not a will, you might get the letters of administration. So that's if the person died without a will or the executors were unable to carry out their function. Another great thing you get would be the affidavits of death or a copy of the death certificates. You might get an inventory or a list of the estates showing assets and liabilities, oaths and affidavits sworn by the executor, the administrator or the powers of attorney, orders relating to the filing of accounts. You might get petitions for probate, and of course you get the grant of probate. So the example on the left here is a will for Joseph Inch, who died in 1836. So beautifully written. And then you see the X down the bottom as the signature of Joseph Inch himself. Here's an example of Mary Reeby's probate packet, so someone quite well known. She dies in 1855. The document on the left is the affidavit of death, so it's saying that yes, she did die on the 30th of May 1855 and that she had property whilst living, and at the time of her decease, she had property in New South Wales. So they're the two key things. Up the top on the right-hand side, we've got Mary's actual signature from her will. And then the third document there is the actual annotation on the documents by the Supreme Court, the Register of the Supreme Court or the Protonotary, saying that probate had been granted. So this is usually what the actual grant looks like. Sometimes it looks a little bit more scrappy than this, so this is actually quite a nice official looking one, but I will show you some other ones as we go through the course of today's webinar. So what probates do we hold in the State Archives collection? Well, currently we hold 1876, Currently we hold 1817 to 1976 and 1989. We're in the process of the court transferring to us 1978 and 1979, and they will be available, we think, over the next few months. So after the 1st of July, but in the next few months, they will become available in our catalogue. So we're in the process of having those being ingested into the system at the moment and being housed on the shelves in the collection. So they're not quite available yet. So all of the probates, apart from 78 and 79, are listed in our catalogue by the name of the deceased. They all show the date of death and the date probate granted. They are arranged by the date that probate was granted. This is important because often it's the same year. So if you've had to do probate yourself, you know you'll often get that done quite quickly. But there are times where it can take 20, 30 years or even longer. So arranged by the date probate was granted can be an important thing, especially if you've got someone who dies in the 1970s, but probate may not be granted until the 80s. And if probate was granted in the 80s, unless it was 1989, we wouldn't have that probate in the collection. Probate packets are open to public access after 5 years from the granting of probate. And they're available, the ones in the State Archives collection are available in the reading room, so you can come in and look at them and take photographs or scan copies for free, or you can order copies via our remote copying service, and that is for a fee. And there's copies of over 3,000 probate packets in our catalogue. So you can actually look up and you can sometimes even see them. Bearing in mind we've got over 870,000 at this stage, 890,000 later in the years, over 3,000 are copied right now. So small proportion copied at this stage. So what do you need to know to find a probate packet? Well, a good place to start is the name of the deceased. So bear in mind that there can be spelling variations, particularly post-World War II with a lot of non-British people coming into the country. There can be issues with spelling, people using an anglicised version of their name, that kind of thing. And even earlier with even English names and Irish names, there can be spelling variations. You might want to try different combinations of the names and wildcards in your search. The other thing that can be key is the date of death. So if you've got a family where everyone has the same name, knowing the date of death of the person you're looking for, very important. Even here in this example on the left-hand side here, I've got two women who have very similar names, one dying in 1968 and one dying in 1965. So if you weren't too familiar with them, you might not be exactly sure which one it is that you're looking for. But if you did know that you were looking for the one who dies on the 16th of the 9th, 1965, then it's quite clear which is the probate packet that you're seeking. So there are a few ways to find out a death date. Death certificates, of course. You might find death notices in newspapers, which you can find on the National Library's Trove website. There's also the Ryerson Index to death notices and obituaries in Australian newspapers. So that's where a group of people have actually gone through newspapers and they type up all the details for death notices for every single day, and it is up to the current day. So where there are death notices, they should be included in this index, and then you have to go back to the paper to read the notice, of course. New South Wales birth, death, marriage indexes will show the year but not the day of death. And there's also probate notices in the New South Wales Government Gazette and newspapers, which again you can read on the Trove website. So a few different ways to find the date of death. You may already have it just in the family, of course. So next we're going to look at how to find probate packets, and we have to go back to our website. So again, it's mhnsw.au, and this is our homepage and how it looks at the moment. So you can see up the top there, I've circled this time the collections button. So if you click on that, you'll go to this page here. Now, two different ways that you can go from this page. So we've got our State Archives collection box in the centre there, and this time I've circled the black Discover More button. So if we click on that, we'll go to our State Archives Collection homepage. And from here, you can find out quite a bit about the collection. You can contact us through Ask an Archivist, find out more about the collection and how to use it. And there's also a link to our subjects A to Z, so our alphabetical list of subject guides. So if I click on that, I'll see the letters of the alphabet. If I go to P, I'll go to probate. And the probate packet guide looks like this. This gives you some information about probates and what they are and everything. But importantly for us today, there's a big black button at the top of the guide, search for probate packets in the catalogue. So if I click on that, it will take me straight to the catalogue. So that's one way to get into it. Another way, if we go back to our State Archives collection box that I showed you a couple of slides ago, but this time click on State Archives Catalogue, that'll take me straight to the catalogue. And what I do when I get to the catalogue is I type the name of the person I'm looking for. So I've picked on Kate Ryan. Kate Ryan, fairly common name. So there might be lots of Kate Ryans throughout the collection. So I could narrow down my search by adding the word death after her name, and that will narrow me down to mostly probate packets. Happy days. Another way I could search is by entering the name of the deceased, Kate Ryan, but this time entering the series number for probate packets. So every different series, every group of records in our collection has its own special number. The number for probate packets is 13660. So if I tell the catalogue NRS 13660, it's only going to search for Kate Ryan amongst all the records that have got NRS 13660. So that's a way of limiting my search to just the probate packets. So I come up with 13 probate packets. Another way I can do this search is to enter the name Kate Ryan. Then over on the right-hand side of the screen, I can filter my results to whichever series I'm looking for. So of course, probate packets, I'll just click on or tick the box for probate packets and then click on the button that says Apply Filters. And that will take me directly to the Kate Ryan probate packets. If the name is common, once I get to that point, so we had 13 probate packets, I can actually narrow that search down further by entering the year that they died or the year of the probate being granted. So in this case, I've put 1955, and that's narrowed me from 13 down to 1. And I'm very pleased because it was actually the one I was looking for. So happy days. The other thing that I could do after entering the year and place of death is also filter to what is digitally available. If I was just interested to see what something looked like, or, you know, was there something digitally available? So it's a search that I might do sometimes in the course of my work, and it might be something that's useful for you in your home. You can also filter down to only those that have been digitized and the copies have been uploaded to the catalogue, which is what I've done here with that bottom screen. Now, if the packet isn't digitized, there's two ways that you can see it. You can come to see us at Kingswood in our reading room. If you're going to do this, you will need a reader's ticket, which you can apply for online. When you make that application, someone has to manually enter your details into a database, and they'll email you back with your number. Once you've got your reader's ticket number, then you can order records for a couple of days in advance, next week, next month, for when you're coming in to visit the reading room. Once you get here and you're looking at your records, you can copy them for free, so you can use your own phone or your own camera, or you can use one of our cameras or scanners, which we have on stands in the reading room. Just bring a USB to save the images too. If you can't come into the reading room and you can't convince someone else to come in for you, another option is to use our paid copy order service. So you can order and pay online for copies. There is a fee for the service, and then the copies are uploaded to the website after, well, we send them to you first, and then later we'll upload those copies to the website. So you're kind of sponsoring, I suppose, that copy to go up online for everyone else's benefit too. Over on the right-hand side here, I've just circled the two little icons that you need to click on to be able to make those two things happen. So firstly, the clipboard if you're ordering for the reading room, and then there's a form further over to the left that you complete to finish your order. And then the little shopping cart is the one that you click on if you want to order and pay for copies to be emailed to you. So if you're clicking on that shopping cart, you'll be shown a screen like this. Very important that the first thing that you do is tell the system whether you want hard copy or digital copy. So hard copy is where we print the things out and post them to you. Digital copy is where we do the copies and email them to you. Then you click on Add to Cart, and then that's that fairly standard process after that of completing the order and paying like you would if you were buying anything else online. And if you can see over on the very right-hand side of the screen, we've got the orange shopping cart there. That is where you finish the order, and also to the big orange clipboard. Once you've selected the item, then you go to that orange tab, that orange clipboard, to finish the order for the reading room. Okay, so if I was going to look at something that was digitised, this PDF icon is my clue that something has been copied. So here I've done the search where I've searched for Kate Ryan. I filtered down to probate packets, then I filtered down to what was digitally available. If I click anywhere on that red writing, what will open up is the item details screen like this. And then if I click on that little tiny PDF icon with the downloady thing there, it will open up that file and I can view it. And I can do that all from the comfort of my own phone, my own iPad, my own laptop at home. So next we're going to just look at some definitions before we look at some examples of what sorts of things you can see in probate packets. So firstly, the executor. So that's the person who's named in the will to administer the estate. They have to do some things. So they have to determine what assets belong to the estate. They have to pay any debts that are owing. So it could be mortgages or medical bills or food bills, that kind of thing. And then they have to distribute the estate to those that are entitled. The estate, this could be any real estate property or any personal property of the deceased. So any land or jewellery, furniture, shares, bank accounts, all that sort of stuff. If someone dies testate, it means they have a valid will and they're referred to sometimes as the testator. And the grant of probate is the authority given by the Supreme Court to the executors to deal with the deceased estates. And the probate documents, as we said before, certify that a will is valid. So here we've got the famous Kate Ryan. We've got her probate packet. This is the one that was digitised. So she died in 1955. Happily for us, she's left a lovely typed will for us, which we can see on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side of the screen there, we've got the affidavit of death. So we have the funeral director saying that she did die at Singleton, the date of her death, that he knew her well, both in business and socially, and he did see her deceased, her dead body. So he has seen the body, so he can confirm that she has actually passed away. Another thing that you might get with these 20th century probate packets is this affidavit D, which was lodged with the Stamp Duties Office for the payment of stamp duties. And so this is interesting as well because it tells us that she's 86 years of age. It tells us the name of the executors as well as their addresses and occupations. So I'd say it's her two sons. We've got one who's an accountant, one who's an engine driver, both living at Singleton. And then on the right-hand side, we've got another document, which you often see, which lists all of the heirs. In this case, it's her daughters and sons. It always tells us the relationship to the deceased. So mostly they are family, but sometimes not. And then it tells us how much of the estate is owing to that person. So that's an interesting document as well. If we think to Gladys Walcott, who we saw earlier, Gladys Walcott was she 1965 or 1968? This time we're going to have a look at her estate from 1965, her probate packet. So in this instance, we've got the death certificate. So that's what you can see on the left-hand side there. So it's the full death certificate. And then on the right-hand side here, we've got a list of the assets in her estate and how much they're worth. So we can see she's got real estate, furniture, jewellery, money, shares, and a life insurance policy. And next, we also get the breakdown of her furniture and how much it's all worth. So you can see there, she's got quite a bit of furniture and it's all listed in detail, which is quite amazing, right down to the waste paper basket in bedroom number 1 there, which was worth 5 shillings. So quite an interesting piece of detail there. We also get the certificate of valuation for her land. And then the last document there is what you can see is the grant of probate. So yes, it is indeed just that annotation that says granted and then signed by the registrar and the date that it's signed. So that's it. That is the grant of probate. And the last document, so this is a slightly different case. So she had nominated her son, Anthony, to be the executor, but for various reasons, he's had to step back from that role and he has had to nominate the public trustee to be the executor of that will in his stead. So the document on the right is the statement that that has happened. So that's interesting as well. He's had to renounce that probate, that executorship, sorry. Okay, so some more definitions. So if someone dies intestate, it means they die without leaving a valid will. So they die intestate if they haven't got a valid will. So of course there's no named executor in that case. So the Supreme Court has to sort out someone to do that. So they issue a letter of administration. So this authorises a person to act as the executor. Could be the public trustee, could be a solicitor, could be a son, a wife, a widow, grandchildren, whatever. And there are probate packets for intestate estates as well. So just because someone dies intestate doesn't mean there's no probate packet. And sometimes they're actually more interesting because the Supreme Court has to check into more details about the family and who the heirs to the estate might actually be. Here we've got an example of a probate of an intestate estate from 1882. This is Henry Angelo Birkbeck. So on the left, we've got the grant of probate that happened after the whole process was completed. On the right, we've got a statement to say that he was a bachelor and that we have the list of the family. So his father had predeceased him, but his mother is still alive, as well as a number of brothers and one sister. And so we've got the names of all of the brothers and the sisters there. So very, very good, especially for your family history. The next documents that we have are the affidavit of death. So we've got someone else, because Henry dies in Canamble, so we've got the storekeeper at Canamble saying that he knew Henry Angelo Birkbeck and had also viewed his dead body. And then on the right-hand side, we've got one of the brothers handing over the power of attorney to administer the estate to a solicitor in Sydney. So the brother lived in Queensland, but the solicitor was in Sydney. And then we also have this statement from Robert Epiphany Birkbeck of Brisbane, going into the details of the family. And this is quite fascinating because his father had gone to Mexico where he had married Damiana Valdez, and they had a few children in Mexico before then coming to Sydney. It says that the father had then died at Rockhampton in Queensland in 1867, and it lists all of the children of the marriage. So, and it tells us where those children were born and where they now live, their occupations, and the names are wonderful. So we have Robert Epiphany Birkbeck, we'd have Carlos Narcissus Birkbeck. We have Morris Geronimo Birkbeck, Arthur Damien Birkbeck, George Lewis Birkbeck, and so on. And there's also the names of two baby brothers that had passed away in infancy, and it says, and were not married, and they're also included in this document. So this is a fabulous document as far as family history goes. So, you know, you can get some really great stuff. Here we've got a later intestate estate from 1912. So this is a fairly wealthy person who passes away without a will. And in this document, we have the name of the will. So we've got John McHugh, who's the person who's passed away. Margaret McHugh is his widow. And then all of the children. So where the daughters are married, they give the husbands' names and their occupations. And for the sons, they also give the occupations of each of those sons and where they're living. So there's shearers and graziers and saddlers and wives of shearers and so on. So quite an interesting document about what people were doing in the country at that time, I guess. And here we have his list of assets. So on the left-hand side, we have signatures of all the children. On the right-hand side, the list of assets. So we've got the lists of the various land he owned with the volume and folio numbers, so you can trace it up in land records, and also any of the conditional purchases he owned and those numbers that can help you get into doing the research. And then over the page, we've got some really good descriptions of the land, which you don't often see. We were just commenting the other day. So you don't usually see this level of detail about the improvements and the kind of land that it was with the different sorts of trees and things on there. On the right-hand side there, we've got the values of those improvements. So things like how much the cottage was valued to, and the separate kitchen, the shearer's kitchen, the hay shed, the dairy, the sheep dip, and the fencing and all of that sort of stuff, how much that was all worth. So these documents are really valuable documents, I guess, both for your family history, your land research, and also just tracing through some of that inheritance and the people, of course. So what happens when you can't find a probate packet in the catalogue? Why does that happen? Well, the main reason that could happen is that perhaps the person left no real or personal property in New South Wales. That can be one thing. Another question to ask might be, are you really looking for someone who dies after the time that we have probate packets in the collection? So did they die currently later than 1976, soon to be later than 1979? Did they die in the 90s or the early 2000s, for examples? Well, those probate packets are still in the custody of the Supreme Court of New South Wales. So if you're looking for a later probate packet, you do need to contact the Supreme Court for access to that material. The other thing to remember is that probates are arranged by the date that probate was granted. So particularly with probates in the 70s and 80s, if it took a few years to settle, which they can, then you need to be thinking about when was it granted, and if it was granted after the time for which we hold packets in the collection, again, you'll have to go back to the Supreme Court of New South Wales. Sometimes probate was the subject of a later court case in the probate division. So you can well imagine that sometimes there's court cases between families or within the family over the property. So this might be the subject as that kind of a court case. So you could check things like the will books, which I'll talk about in a second, or the court reporting office transcripts for details of the court cases to see if you might be able to pick that up. And then if you're looking for a 19th century case or up to 1914, and it's an estate that was administered by the curator of intestate estates, we don't usually have probate packets for those people, but we do have records from the curator of intestate estates. So you can check the index for the curator of intestate estates, and you might pick up the reference to that deceased person that way. So there's a few different possibilities there. Sometimes you have the opposite problem, that you might get 2 or 3 probate packets occasionally, very occasionally you might get more, but there's usually situations that involve executors court cases may be. So one situation that you might have is if there's several executors and there's a couple that are here and there's one that's overseas or out of the colony, when that one comes back, they might do a new probate packet with the documents that that person has had to sign and deal with as the executor. Another situation is that there might be several executors, but one might have died or refused to do probate, or they couldn't find them, so they might have to do a couple of probates there. Another possibility is that an executor dies halfway through the probate process without fully administering the estate of the deceased. And that can happen. So the example on the right here for Alfred Edward Caller was just that. He dies in 1936. Probate's granted in 1960. But then there's a second probate packet, dying 1936, probate not granted until 1974. So that's nearly 40 years later. And it turns out when you go to have a look at the documents that his son, Charles Alfred Caller, had died without fully administering the estate of his father. So Charles's daughter, Ella, goes back in 1974, and as part of administering her father's estate, she's then also got to go back and complete the process of administering the grandfather's estate. And on the right here, we've actually got a copy of the letter of administration, which you don't always see the actual copy. So this is another interesting document to see. So these things do crop up. There's a million different circumstances because every family is different and all circumstances are different, but they're things that you can look out for and they're things that do happen. So another thing that happens sometimes too, particularly with 19th century probates, is that there's no list of assets always there. So it's definitely something that you see more in the 20th century. And we wonder whether technology is a part of that. So if you think 19th century, most things were handwritten, so it's a lot more effort to create that second copy of a document just to go to another department. Maybe they just send it across and then send it back to wherever it had to go. There was no Stamp Duties Act until 1880. So prior to that, was it really a thing that they had to create these lists of assets and lodge them with the court so much? Maybe not. The other thing that happened in the late 1960s to about 1983 was that the Supreme Court did a cull on probate packets and got rid of a lot of the letters of a lot of the lists of the assets. And so it's a bit up and down, possibly depending on who was the actual person doing the work. But the kinds of things that they got rid of were the certificates of valuations of real estate, valuations of furniture, and correspondence. So in this time period, the late 60s to 1983, you may not always see all of those list of asset documents. Here on the right, just to remind you of the kind of thing that we're looking at, we've got a list of assets from Elizabeth Throsby's estate, and she dies in 1891 at Berrima. It is handwritten and it is all there, so it's wonderful to see that, but it's probably less rather than more common. The will books, another thing to let you know that we have. These are copies of original wills and letters of administration from 1800 to 1984. So for those later years when we don't hold probate packets, they're really good. It's something that you can check to at least see what the wording of the will was. Prior to 1924, they were handwritten. And I think one of the cutest stories is, of course, this story about the Australian cricket team in the down season would be compiling copies of will books. And this was because a senior officer of the Supreme Court was also chairman of the cricket board and arranged the work for the cricket team during the winter months, so something to keep them busy. The will books are, again, arranged by probate packet number. So for when we don't hold the probates and they're not listed in the catalogue, you can check the probate index, which is an index put out by the Supreme Court many years ago. It's on microfiche, so quite a few organisations other than us do have it, but we do have a copy of it in the reading room, and this will give you the probate number. Once you've got the probate number, then you can look for the will book. So how can you get access to them? We've got copies on microfilm up to 1952. And those copies have been digitised on the Find My Past website as well. So you can look at those if you don't have a subscription to Find My Past. Lots of public libraries do. That's one thing you can do. And then you can also view the originals from 1952 to 1984 in the reading room. So as I said, for those later years that we don't actually hold the probate packet, it's quite a handy thing, but only until 1984. This is what they look like. So you can see it really is just that someone sat there and written up the copy of the will. So we've got Elizabeth Throsby's will there in copy, and then here we have compared to the original. So the original is, of course, much prettier, but the words are the same. Another thing that we have for probate is the early probate records from 1790 to 1875. This is a separate collection of probate records. These are records that were administered by the ecclesiastical jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. We've indexed them, so that's probably really what you need to know. If you go to the subjects A to Z and P for probates, you'll find this probate supplementary index there, and you can search them there. And you can also search those details in the catalogue. So this index also appears in the catalogue, and then you can just filter to that index. So here we've got the example of Anne Baker, dying in 1810. And this is the kind of document that we see for those early sorts of documents. So it's not very much, but at least it is a record of this happening. And Anne Baker is one of these early people. So there are mentions of her throughout other early documents in the Colonial Secretary's papers and that kind of thing. Now, where else could you look for probate packets for people who died in New South Wales? So if someone died in New South Wales but owned property in another state or territory of Australia, I'd also consider contacting the archives in that state or territory. So if they died in Victoria, for example, died in New South Wales but had property in Victoria, I'd contact the Public Records Office of Victoria. And similarly, in the State Archives collection, we have probates for people who died out of New South Wales but owned property in New South Wales. So Dame Nellie Melba, for example, owned shares in New South Wales, but she didn't die here. But because she had those shares in New South Wales, we do have a probate packet for her for those. And there's also this other situation where a deceased might have died in New South Wales but owned property in the UK before 1858. So in that situation, a will would have been proved in the UK in the Prerogative Court of Canterbury. And those wills are indexed and online at the National Archives UK. Many of them relate to military personnel, but there's also some for people who also appear in New South Wales probate records. So some of those big names like William Redfern and John Oxley, and probably lesser known people, of course. So that's another thing to keep in mind if you've got an early New South Wales death. And what other estate records have we got in the collection? Well, there's the deceased estate files. They cover 1880 to 1958, and they're all listed in our catalogue, and some of those are digitised. And you'll usually find that there's a probate packet or a deceased estate and a deceased estate file. And the other thing is that if there's not always a deceased estate file there usually would be a probate packet. The Curator of Intestate Estate case papers, as I said earlier, they cover up to 1913. Usually these people don't have probate packets, so it's a very good alternative for some of those early estates. And then we've got the public trustee, who also, quite helpfully, had a series of records called Deceased Estate Files covering 1911 to 1984. Now, these are the paperwork that the public trustee keeps for the estates that they administer, but these ones are closed to public access for 100 years from the date of administration, so we don't see those quite often in the reading room. They are listed in the catalogue, but they are closed for 100 years. But you do also find that there's often a probate packet for these estates, and those ones are open, of course, up to after 5 years. So for someone with a public trustee deceased estate file, you might get a probate packet as well as a Stamp Duty's Office deceased estate file and a deceased estate file from the public trustee. So, very happy days, I guess. So that brings to an end my webinar on the probate packets. Thank you so much for your time and for attending. Thank you.